was shock and an absolute disbelief that something on the ground of that scale had happened. However, this is the sort of attack that Hamas has been planning unsuccessfully for years. We are 10 years, almost 10 years away from the last major military ground incursion in Gaza, and that stemmed from a kidnapping in Israel in 2014. And during that conflict, there were serious attempts to tunnel under a kibbutz nearby and to seize hostages and drag them out. I think that the scale of the attack, the perfect storm of the music festival, the Jewish holiday, and all of the other circumstances around that gave them an element of surprise. And all the factors behind that are going to be examined with great detail once the shooting stops and the conflict is over. It was, I think the best way to describe it is an absolutely horrific, perfect storm of circumstances that allowed the terrorists to achieve what they achieved, for the death toll to be so horrific, and for events to really go beyond the pale of anyone's imagination. Well, there's several tiers of special operation units within the Israel Defense Forces and the Israel National Police. I've spent much of my career writing about these units and spending time with them. And when the attack occurred, the amount of infiltrators was so large that and the level of preparedness and reaction abilities was limited by the amount of breaches in the fence and the amount of attacks, that hostages were seized, and the job of rescuing them, of ending these barricade ordeals, fell on some of the top tier units in the IDF and the Israel National Police. And among the military and law enforcement casualties up so far, a large number are from the Israeli version of the Special Air Service, the Israeli National Police counter-terrorist unit, from the undercover unit, from the naval commandos. These very elite units that are professional, that are trained to react at a moment's notice to the most pressure-packed situations. It is a nightmare situation. If we go back a few years to the attacks in Mumbai, and we look at the carnage and the difficulty for the Indian units, hostage incidents require enormous manpower. They are protracted. They are not simple events that can be concluded quickly within the 1 hour of a television show. You have negotiators, you have psychologists, you have medical people. You have to figure out how to breach, how to enter, how to make sure that the good guys are protected. And I think that the manpower, I think that when we think of what happened over the last 72 hours in Israel, and the number of hostages, the number of locations, and the amount of manpower that had to be summoned, and the firefights that ensued, the Israeli response was remarkable. It was dedicated, and in that perspective, successful. Going into Gaza is going to be a much more difficult situation. You have 150, perhaps even more hostages that are spread out in tunnels, in people's homes. We don't know if they're still alive. We don't know their medical condition. One of the elements that would need to be remembered is that in the attack, you had the terrorists that went in as the planned operation, those that joined on once the holes in the fence existed. And in Gaza, everybody has an AK-47. And then the onlookers and the terror tourists that came out to loot and to steal. And that type of multi-layered threat will exist for any unit that goes in to try and rescue. The intelligence has to be gathered. The intelligence has to be accurate and fluid. Otherwise, you find yourselves dedicating enormously precious resources around a location that doesn't hold any value. You want to make sure that the intelligence isn't faulty, isn't purposely planted, so that you're not going into a trap. It is a nightmare scenario for armies that are 100 times larger than the IDF and the National Police. And it is not going to be an easy time moving forward until the situation is resolved. We are in uncharted territories. This is unprecedented. Large-scale hostage rescues have usually involved one location. They've involved aircraft, trains, tubular assaults that would enable one entry, one exit, or multiple points that the rescuers could breach. You could have hostages that are now in a tunnel near the Israeli frontier, and you can have hostages that have been moved near the Egyptian border. You can have hostages that have been buried alive. The barbarity that was displayed by the attack provides no envelope into how these poor individuals might be treated and where they might be situated. Now, this was for Israel, Pearl Harbor and 9/11 wrapped into one. And the Israeli population wants its people back. But I think that the realization that Hamas cannot coexist in a landscape that the state of Israel exists in is evident. For years, various Israeli governments of various political persuasions have tried to convince the world that Gaza is a cauldron and that money and humanitarian aid and all the political pressure to get Israel to relax its efforts against Gaza are inhumane, and that Hamas is someone that they will need to deal with. Well, I think that this was the deal breaker, and that Hamas cannot be dealt with. And I think that the only negotiations that really can take place will be that Israel will not devastate and decimate everything that Hamas has built up over these years, unless its citizens are returned and returned immediately. I don't think that this can go on as a protracted hostage ordeal with negotiations. I mean, this isn't a regular incident, and the captives aren't, they're kidnapped. They're victims of a crime, and I think that this isn't the type of reality where you can sit down and negotiate in good faith. I think all that went out the window at 6:30 in the morning on October 7th. Hamas is still holding the remains of 2 soldiers who were killed in 2014. And I think that the IDF and the other units that will go in will be incredibly aware of this. And I think that lessons have been learned from 2014. And I think that all measures humanly possible will be taken to make sure that no soldier is left behind, and that Hamas doesn't achieve any small victories out of what Israel is planning to do on the ground.